The Yakuza games have never really had cutting-edge graphics. They've never looked ugly, well, not recent games at least, but where the games all shine is all on their presentation and the whole style of the visuals. Not only is it a style, but it's also rather stylish with the exaggerated over-the-top action in its gameplay. To say the least, the Yakuza games have sauce. No, not sauce, I mean sauce. Whether it's in general combat or the combat encounters on their own, the striking presentation of the Yakuza games has always been leaps and bounds beyond so many other games that I've played. The games have always relied on a realistic visual style that manages to blend realistic characters and animations with over-the-top and unrealistic reactions when a character gets smacked in the face. What I mean is that sometimes when a character will get hit, they'll react in an intentionally cartoonish way, but for the most part, they'll react in such a way that allows a lot of weight to be added. Sometimes enemies will wince or writhe in pain in a very realistic manner, but other times they'll be sent flying in just the right way to make it seem like whatever did that to them was incredibly powerful, but they don't get launched in the same way a Dragon Ball character does. It is quite similar then to the Tekken series, where a character will do a very fluid and natural looking punch and will cause another character to do a backflip and bounce off the ground. Both game franchises have well done camera shake and zoom ins with emphatic particle effects and snappy but fierce punches and kicks that are always thrown around to create some very cool looking gameplay. But where the two differ is that the Yakuza games often use blood, sometimes a lot, sometimes a little, to emphasize the damage a character receives, whereas the Tekken series has now opted for much flashier particle effects to add a lot of weight to the attacks. Take some of the new trailers for Tekken 8, where the particle effects are turned up to the max, but then take the newest Yakuza entry, like Dragonation, where the blood is incredibly exaggerated. They both present themselves in a way that is, for lack of a better word, cool, and again, they both aim to look realistic, but the over-the-top animations create that visual appeal that you can't get in pure realism. In a very realistic game, like The Last of Us for example, they tend to add a lot of weight and depth animations and in making it really seem like you're swinging as much of your body into something with the intention of murdering someone. And with the frailty of human life, it often means smacking a guy in the head and just kind of killing him straight away, as opposed to Yakuza and Tekken where you can punch a dude 100 times and he'll stand back up just so you can punch him again. Where The Last of Us tries to make you feel bad for killing people, even though that's the whole point of the game and the protagonist is a ruthless murderers, but the Yakuza games try to make you feel good for smacking people in the head in very creative ways. These creative methods are most commonly done through the game's most iconic gameplay mechanic, being the heat actions, or the EX actions as they're called in the two spin-off games Judgment and Lost Judgment. By punching dudes enough to build up your heat, you can perform a heat action by doing some sort of specific thing first, then pressing a button, and boom, you've just smashed a dude's face with a traffic cone, thrown a guy off a balcony, punched a dude in the face, then headbutt his face, picked a guy up and slammed him headfirst into the ground, dragged someone's face along the ground, kicked someone in the head, shot someone multiple times and slammed him with the gun you just shot him with, thrown a guy in the air and kicked his head right before he hits the ground, stabbed a dude, smacked someone several times with a Kali sticks, thrown a guy down a staircase, slammed a dude's ass into a railing, bonked someone's head with someone else's head, any of the above, and so much more. There are a stupid amount of ways to use the environment and your own tools to break several bones within several people. Not only are the heat actions extremely creative, but like I was saying earlier, they are really well animated and surprisingly realistic. Each heat action can feel like a finely crafted cutscene or action sequence that another game might have, but in reality, they're just special attacks you can do whenever the hell you want. They really get your blood pumping in ways you probably wouldn't want to share with the government as you keep on looking for more heat actions to do or keep on doing the same one over and over and over again just to watch it again, and again. But what about these heat actions actually make them so satisfying? Well, I compare it to a game that, even though I really enjoyed it, has a similar mechanic within it that is handled in quite a dogshit way. In Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019, they added a thing that they called finishing moves, although I just call them executions. They were very clearly ripped off of Halo Reach and later Halo games' assassinations, which Halo Reach, despite how old it is, did a way better job of. But I'm comparing the heat actions to the recent COD games, as they sell like 5.82 billion copies of them each year and make a gajillion dollars and honestly should do a better job. So in COD, when you come up behind someone and hold the melee button, you'll do a special animation and kill the enemy you did the attack on. The transition to these animations is always awkward. You walk up behind them, you swing your weapon or fist or whatever towards them, then it just cuts to a strict camera view of you and the enemy where both of your positions have been completely reset, and then you do these quite often boring animations where you just kill someone. The camera tries its best, but it does nothing to really add any emphasis, and given how it's a multiplayer game, you can't really do anything special like slow motion, nor can you really warrant having a slow animation, as, you know, no one will really go for it lest they want to die first. There's also often moments where there's weird clipping or camera issues given how the executions will will always take place exactly where the two players were standing. There's no real source in a lot of these, and the two games that came afterwards thought that the way they could add the source was to make the animations just look ridiculous and trying way too hard to do unique things. Realistically, what you need is just a quick and snappy way to kill someone. That's the point of them. So when the sequel to Modern Warfare 2019 came out last year, they instead decided to do the same shit they were already doing. There are some animations that are actually quite good, and the effort put into the camera is significantly better. But then there's also stupid shit like the one that Captain Price has where he shoots his own hand, but they still have the fundamental flaw of no real emphasis on anything, kind of meh camera work, and that whole shit of the awkward transitions. Compare it to Yakuza, however, and you'll see how much better they can do a fancy little attack animation. In some of the older games, namely something like Ishin 0 and Kiwami 1, a lot of the hit actions when initiated will have what I think of as a wind-up animation. For example, when you go to stomp someone on the head with the unarmed style in both the remake and the original versions of Ishin, Ryoma will wind his foot up in the air when you press the button for the game to then actually start the attack by taking away your control of the camera briefly so that it can really punch in on the guy's head as he gets absolutely stomped. In Yakuza 0, again, when you go to hit a guy while he's down, Kiryu will reach down towards his head for the animation to start by picking up the dude by his hair and turning his head into a bloody football. The later games don't have those wind-up animations and instead will start the animation immediately, but substitutes the wind-ups for significantly cleaner transitions back into normal gameplay. However, while the wind-ups are gone, all of the hit actions do a significantly better job at respecting the context of how the hit action actually started, meaning that if Yagami, for example, is running towards two enemies and you do a hit action, the animation will start with him running towards those two enemies and then smacking the shit out of them. The camera work in COD is more like the game trying its best to make sure as much of both players is visible, so it often feels like a spectator just watching along. In Yakuza, it's like the game grabs your camera for a second and says, "Hey, watch this," as it finally adjusts itself in ways to make sure that what you want to see is what you do see. There's also typically 2 or 3 different sets of camera angles that the game will have, meaning that you can do the same hit action twice in a row and you'll see what is almost like 2 different cutscenes. Being a single player game, they can also get away with a bit of cheating with various animation techniques and slow motion, as you don't have to run the risk of another player seeing it and therefore ruining the illusion. One of the most common secret techniques the Yakuza games do for the hit actions is constantly shifting around the placement of characters whenever the camera cuts during a hit action. There are some times when you can definitely tell that it's happening, such as doing Shinada's climax hit action in Yakuza 5 in a small area. To give off the illusion that Shinada's running for a while, his position gets set back to where it started each time, basically as if he's running all the way forward on a treadmill, then letting it carry him all the way back, then running forward again. Another thing that's a lot more obvious is warping the player and whoever else to a completely different position than where they were initially standing. This technique isn't really used anymore except for, well, I guess, Yakuza Like a Dragon, but it was done to prevent issues such as models clipping through various things or the camera getting stuck on stuff. While visually it does help the attacks to look much nicer and cleaner, it does mean that in gameplay there are a few times where you might expect an enemy to be in a certain spot, only to then be warped back to where you were and everyone was exactly where they once were. Regardless, thanks to these various techniques, even something as simple as literally punching someone in the face has really nice slow motion applied to it and allows the hit action to show the panic in the enemy's face, for the game to then ramp back up again to show the absolute ferocity of that one punch. It lets all of the animations look as good as they can be without needing to compromise on anything too significant. In realistic animations, you can't really get away with animation techniques like squash and stretch and whatever else like you can with more stylized animations, but the Yakuza games make do with what they can in order to not suspend your disbelief, but instead to add this wow factor once again that makes you want to rewatch the same thing over and over again. Furthermore, the COD games just sort of do the same things to kill people that are all mostly the same length as to not hinder someone for picking one that they like the look of. The Yakuza games, on the other hand, have so much variety and creativity that whenever I try to include as many hit actions as I can into a video, I quite honestly can't. So then that means that this piddly little Japanese video game has several more points than one of the most profitable game franchises in history. But while the flashiness and pizzazz are all good, do the hit actions have the same level of thought put into them for gameplay purposes? Well, in COD, again being that it is a multiplayer game, the only real point to an execution is to inflict psychological damage on your opponent. This is because, admittedly, as funny as it is to know that your enemy just has to sit there and watch you kill them, it's significantly more effective to just do this. I do indeed go for them all the time because I think it's funny. However, in Yakuza, the gameplay balance around the hit actions is really well done. I will admit that there are some examples where it isn't the best, such as Yakuza 6 where they're super easy to do and are honestly quite overpowered, or the original Ishin where they're insanely underpowered and deal next to no damage. However, for the most part, they're often one of the best things to go for during combat. They normally deal a good chunk of damage and you can't be damaged while doing them. Because of the amount of ways you can perform them, then it means that in almost all situations, there's one that you can do. However, thanks to a mechanic that the severity of is normally changed around, but for the most part remains the same. You can't just outright spam heat actions. Firstly, you obviously can't do them if you run out of heat, but beyond that, you also can't do a heat action too quickly after doing another one, as there'll be a cooldown on them. Then there's also the fact that a heat action will become stale should you use the same one on the same enemy more than once, but you also don't even have to use them. There are a multitude of regular attacks at your disposal, as well as having the ability to pick up items and weapons on the ground or from your own pockets and smacking people in the head that way. In addition to this, there are also regular abilities that will encourage you to drain your own heat, as the abilities will only function when you're not in heat mode, or will perform better the less heat you have. Conversely, there are abilities that are the opposite, requiring you to be at max heat or being stronger the more heat that you do have. So then, not only do they look cool as hell, but they're honestly quite well balanced in your average gameplay. In addition to the heat actions, there's also several instances of really well animated attacks in boss fights or other similar encounters, which for the most part, all of the appealing things about the heat actions will also apply to these things. First of all, there are the dynamic intros, as they've been dubbed, where a cutscene will play out before an encounter, typically being a boss fight, that will then naturally transition into the fight. I've done plenty of videos dedicated to just those, with one in particular analysing them if you'd like to watch that later. But to briefly explain why the intros are so good, it's quite simply because they're cool. Being given a small introduction on who you're about to beat the shit out of hypes you up for the fight that's about to go down, but in comparison to boss intros that other games do, the style in which the names of the characters are presented, as well as the phenomenal camera and animation work, really add to the excitement of the fights. Within these boss fights, you'll also tend to find quick time events, which is fairly commonplace for modern action games, but the little QTEs found in the Yakuza games are once again well animated, and even the animations for when you fail them have a lot of effort put into them. The cuts to them are quite natural, and don't ever do that awkward thing in other video games where it suddenly pauses that it can prompt you with the button, nor will they pop up in situations that you wouldn't expect them to, such as cutscenes, although there was one time that did happen. They keep you engaged in the boss fights in more ways than one, and usually when you succeed in doing them, you'll be given a lot of heat and or you'll deal damage to the boss. Sometimes there are mid-fight cutscenes for when an enemy will appear, or there'll be some sort of transition to another phase or something like that won't prompt you with a button push, and while typically failing a QTE will result in you just taking some damage, there are a couple that, when failed, will instantly kill you. The game that has the worst QTEs is Yakuza 6, purely for gameplay reasons, as Yakuza 6 is like your average parent, where you're punished for failing, but you're never really rewarded for succeeding, as you more often than not do literally nothing but dodge an attack or something, therefore dealing no damage to the boss. But even still, there's some stuff in Yakuza 6 that's just insanely cool. Some of the QTEs throughout the series are quite funny, but others are just straight out of an action movie. And speaking of action movies, some dynamic intros and some QTEs can be found in a specific encounter type that the community just calls a long battle, and with these you can use plenty of heat actions. Hey, linking back to earlier. These long battles can be kind of thought of as missions in other games, where you'll travel through a level of some sort, knocking out several enemies as you progress, until you're finally met with a boss fight. It's a lot like a side-scrolling beat-em-up, only in a 3D space. What makes these encounters so satisfying to clear is that above all else, they're fun. Clearing through waves and waves of enemies isn't a chore in the long battles, because unlike other games like the PS4 Spider-Man, for a random example, you aren't stuck in the one spot just beating up the same dudes until the game says, okay, you're done, take your rewards, piss off. Instead, you're constantly moving, using multiple tools that the game leaves lying around, like weapons and healing items, or a common environmental object known as a balcony, in which you can throw someone like a javelin. Not to sound like a game journalist or anything, but you really feel like an absolute beast when you're presented with so many men you have to finish off one by one that... No, that's bad. You really feel like a beast as you're presented with several skeletons in which you are free to grind to literal dust. And what is always accompanying these long battles is absolutely kick-ass music. There's normally one or two standard themes used within long battles, but there are plenty that have unique ones that add to the uniqueness of the areas that you're fighting in during these encounters. As much as RGG Studio likes to reuse assets, they always seem allergic to reusing these encounter areas, with some standout ones like Kamurocho Hills in Yakuza 5, Final Area of Lost Judgment, or the very funny one in Yakuza 3 where you have to raid a love hotel and have to keep kicking down doors to rooms that will house a couple who are understandably shocked at seeing a massive man at the door, to which Kiryu politely apologizes and slowly walks off, and then does it again like 6 more times. But despite how exciting and epical the gameplay and combat encounters are, the absolute best part about the general gameplay of the entire franchise is that even if somehow you get bored of the main game, you can go ahead and muck around in a plethora of side content for as long as you like. Whether it's fun and original minigames, tried and true real life games, or the hilarious side quests and side stories, you really have so much available to you to have fun with. I personally find the combat to be so fun that I'll just run in circles to get random encounters just to fight people, but even I still get distracted and play board games for like an hour. A lot of people will praise these games for their stories, and while some of the stories are terrible, they all have a great cast of characters, and some of the stories are just beyond phenomenal. Others will praise the games for their absurd humor, and while it may not tickle everyone's pickle, or whatever, that's understandable, as these games having such a serious tone most of the time being contrasted by the silliest shit ever is just honestly hilarious. But for me, the main thing I always try to sell to other people besides the incredible music is just that all of them are fun. No matter what you're doing in whichever game, one of the things that will keep you going is the fact that you're having fun, except for one. So not only do the games present themselves in such a striking manner, taking great pride in their ability to have movie quality animations for a character eating bread or someone being punched in the face, I feel where they take even greater care is in making sure that at the end of the day, you're playing a video game, and if it's not fun, why bother? If seeing a character expertly wield a weapon like nunchucks is just as cool as them literally just punching a dude in the stomach, then clearly these developers have done something right. And as much as I like to bully the shit out of them and have likely been blacklisted from any sort of public relations with them until further notice, and by the way, that's not a joke, I'm pretty sure I'm right, I do genuinely believe that these games have the best visual presentation of any video game franchise that I've ever witnessed. The closest, for me, is the Tekken games, but given the restricted nature of a side-fighting game versus an open-world beat-em-up, the Yakuza games have so much more room to breathe with their enemy encounters, special attacks, and also the fact that Tekken 7's story mode sucked dick. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, then don't worry, I won't do the typical YouTuber thing of asking you to like, subscribe, and share and whatever else. Instead, what I'll do is teach you how to bake a nice and crisp apple pie. Just kidding, subscribe, because I'm almost at 25k. Now then, to end this video, I will simply do this because it's my channel, and I can do whatever I want.